against him never answered the question Jesus posed to them. And what was the question? Jesus said, "Why are you thinking such things in your hearts? Which is easier to say to the sick man or to the paralytic, 'Your sins are forgiven,' or to say, 'Rise, pick up your mat and walk'?" You see, the same question that perhaps you can answer. Which is easier to say? Your sins are forgiven, or rise, pick up your mat and walk. So it is against two things. First, which is easier, forgiveness or physical healing? See, it seems that Jesus would like to emphasize in this gospel that it's much difficult to give forgiveness and ask for forgiveness than physical healing. You see, a lot of people would think that it's difficult. Physical healing is difficult because it's in the borderline of a miracle. And simply they say forgiving or forgiveness is easy. No. On the contrary, if you go to a healer or you desire healing for your sickness or for yourself, emotional healing, spiritual healing is much more difficult than physical healing. Physical healing is the easiest. The easiest because it is based on the physical. But forgiveness, which comes from the heart, from the emotions, repenting and asking for forgiveness, that is even more difficult. Spiritual forgiveness, spiritual healing, much more difficult. It's easy to cure a person. If a person gets hurt, you can bring him to the hospital, and at once the wound can be dressed and healed and cured. But what goes on in the heart of this man who was hurt physically by somebody, the hatred that developed in his heart, the anger, that is a more difficult healing. So you see, my dear friends, once I was in Australia and there was this lady who was, she had a little physical problem because of an accident. She hardly can walk. And so she was brought into the healing session where I said a mass in a wheelchair. And so when it was her turn to be healed, I put my hands on her knees, and I heard very clearly a click. It says click. So I know something happened in the knee, and so I started shouting and praising God and thanking God, and I said, "Woman, I think it's about time that you stand up from that wheelchair and walk." And she started to walk, slowly at first. And she was crying. She was crying. But then I can overhear the husband who was crying even louder. And he was kneeling, a few inches away from his wife, and he was beating his breast and said, "Lord, I'm sorry. And I said, Why? What's the problem here?" It's a little community of something like 150 people. They all come from the same village, and everybody knows who. They know who this man is. He works for the Qantas Airlines, and he started kneeling down and shouting and beating his breast, and meaning more than the wife was crying and experiencing the joy of healing that she can now walk. When I asked this man why he was crying and shouting and asking God for forgiveness, he said, ever since his wife had this accident, never went to church, started hating priests, hating the church, hating anything connected with religion. He started to become so frustrated, almost an atheist, never went to church since that time, and that was about something like 2.5 years. And so people were clapping their hands, I don't know, when I started saying that this woman has been healed by the Lord and she can now walk. People clapped their hands, they applauded. But when I said this man, the husband, is now back to the Lord because of a spiritual and emotional healing, oh, you can hear the applause much louder. You know why? Because that's more difficult healing. It's a more difficult healing, I suppose. So Jesus proved this in this gospel, and I think all of us should also have this experience of being healed somehow in a manner by which the healing is even more difficult, and we're speaking about emotional, spiritual healing, which brings us to the greatest gift that the Lord can give more than physical healing, and that is forgiveness. Thank you very much, and we would like to greet all our